This is Sybert signing into Red Alert 3 on the map Infinity Isle and spawning on the left side as the Red Soviets. It's L3o3d, or Leod. I don't know, there's some 3s in there. I don't know if they're supposed to be E's or 3s. You tell me, please. On the right side, we do have as the blue allies, 1stNoob. And no, I'm not going to pronounce the hyphen at the beginning. That's just silly. Now, this replay was sent to me, which does mean I have no idea what it's going to be like. It could be a game for laughs. It could be just a solid match. We shall see. But Soviets versus Allies SVA. Oh, look at that wall placement. Look at that wall placement. Isn't it great? That's like a me wall placement. That's like a wall placement that I would do. Poor fellow. At one point, I don't know why we even said that. At any rate, that was just weird. SVA, not a matchup that we see a super ton of, but, I mean, it's slightly more common than SVE or SVS. However, between these two players, again, I haven't seen a ton of them. I don't know if I've ever actually casted Leo. I know that he's played in a couple of tournaments, so I may have casted some random matches from him then, but other than that, I'm not 100% sure if I've casted him. Airfield going to be coming out, but it's pretty standard timing. It's not like super fast airfield. It's after both refineries. The MCV move will be indicating that it's not going to be fast tier 2 into cryocopters, nothing like that. Second reactor, most likely going to be an expansion before the tier 2. Could potentially end up going expansion out on the water if he really wants to, and then potentially go up to 4 refineries in the middle of the map. But our allied player is going to be going off into the water. Always a bit of a gamble, especially versus a war factory before super reactor, because if it's super reactor first, it's almost always going to be hammer tanks, just straight up production. But at any point in the game, even versus an allied player, a Soviet player can indeed find the time and the money to sneak out at least one terror drone. But a lot of times it is just going to be like 3 to 4 bullfrogs, depending on how comfortable the player is. If it's Tengu, then they'll build like 2 bullfrogs and just micro perfectly and somehow end up winning the game and like never losing a bullfrog. You're just like, how? I don't understand. But at any rate, most other players tend to go for 4 bullfrogs versus Vindicators. If it's like dual airfield Vindicators and they're spending all of their bombers just killing your bullfrogs, then maybe you should just keep building bullfrogs, because there's no way that they're going to be engaging super effectively. Drops on the oil derrick and does lose a Vindicator, which is unfortunate for 1stNoob. He needs to make sure that he's a little bit more careful with his Vindicators. He can't just be donating them. Conscripts for most likely the scout, but I really dig this from Leo. He's just going to be running the conscripts around. Of course, he can head in with his bear, but this is kind of the point where you get out one terror drone and then you try to go for the harvester kill. Now, to prevent this, 1stNoob has gone for the naval yard, but you can still sit over here with your terror drone and lock down that harvester. Potentially, I mean, if your opponent does something silly like sell off their naval yard, then you can just go for the infect. But I imagine at this point, Leo, 1stNoob is just going to be like, all right, I'm going to keep maybe one Riptide or a Dolphin over near here, so that at least, actually, could be just sending out everything to try to kill off this expansion. The sentry gun is going down, and with the adaptive armor, that harvester will survive for a little bit. There's the terror drone, and there's the tier 2. So if he goes airfield immediately after this, we'll have to see if he decides to go just straight up twin blades, or if he's going to be going for more of a hammer tank composition. Now, of course, twin blades will allow you to protect all of the areas of your base a little bit more easily, just because they're a little bit more agile, and they can, of course, go over terrain no problemo. However, this multi-prong harass, I can dig if it was actually multi-prong harass. The Dolphins really aren't doing anything at all, which is fine, because the Dolphins don't have to be doing anything necessarily, but it's, of course, good for them to come in here. Oh, we canceled the sentry gun, so this is a great opportunity for the Dolphins to come in here. The Tier 2 is done. The airfield isn't down just yet, but this one Riptide is going to be getting locked down. This Terror Drone has to be careful. Leo, if he's not paying attention, he's just going to be ending up losing that Terror Drone. And Bullfrogs can, of course, escape out onto the water, but you always got to be careful. If the Riptides are out on the water, they suddenly do quite a bit more damage. And this Riptide may end up just getting shot up by the Sickle, but at this point, I think the Sickles are going to need to be in a little bit higher numbers, which you can see a couple of more Sickles running up now. Finally, wow, that Harvester actually did get killed off. A lot of times, the Vindicators are able to deal with the Sickles so much more quickly than the Sickles can kill off the Harvester. It's usually a non-issue. Tesla Coil does get dropped down. The second Dolphin needs to actually start attacking that Tesla Coil. And actually, if they can chase away this Harvester and just get it far enough away from the Tesla Coil, then that Tesla Coil is suddenly kind of a moot point. The Harvester does get stopped there. The Sickle didn't even have to jump inside. And this Harvester hasn't actually been rebuilt, which means this, what should be like 4 refinery economy, has actually been a bit reduced down to 2. There's the jump. A nice move there by 1stNoob. But he is not necessarily going to be able to kill off this Tesla Coil. It's going to be close regardless. Oh, he may have been able to stay and kill it off. It would have been 1 or 2 more hits. I'm not exactly sure if it would have been close enough or not. Hammer Tanks will be able to leech down this multi-gunner turret, but I really like what 1stNoob is doing, moving forward with the Peacekeepers. If he forces the Hammer Tanks forward for the crush, then suddenly they're in range of the multi-gunner turret, but he's dropping down the Badger Bombers, calling in the Desolator airstrike. He may catch 1 or 2 of these Peacekeepers, but they do pull back in time. And the reaction time is good enough, and again, going to be calling in that cash bounty, which I, of course, really dig. Anytime Soviet players do this, it's such a good move. I mean, you can go for the Terror Drone Surprise right off the bat, but you get that little bit of cash back here and there. You can throw it on your own units and suicide them in, and suddenly the suiciding that you just did isn't nearly as bad. The Vindicator does escape, which is very important for any allied player to be able to deal with multi-pronged attacks, because as many complaints as there are about Allied aircraft are an integral part of any Allied composition, and very rarely do you actually see Allied players win without going aircraft. Vindicators are strong, but they are a necessary part of your army. Cryo Shot going to be coming down. 1 Hammer Tank does get cleaned up, immediately hands off some nice veterancy to that Peacekeeper, and Hydrofoil's getting mixed in. I'm digging this a lot from 1stNoob. I'm not actually sure who this guy is, if he's under a different name some of the time, as I can't actually check. But bringing in the Hydrofoil is such a smart move. Then suddenly 2 Riptides become so much more powerful versus any single unit or base defense counters. Because, oh, look at that. Your Tesla Coil is now locked down completely. Riptides, if he tries to drop down a sentry gun, that's just more value for those Riptides. If he tries to drop down another Tesla Coil, then it's not quite too much. And you have to kind of decide, like, do I want to take out the Tesla Coil, and then once that's taken out, I can use the Hydrofoil to lock down the sentry gun, or do I try to kill off the sentry gun before it actually gets built, or get it close enough to being killed off before it actually gets built? He needs to really focus down one or the other. He may actually be able to get it in time, and the Tesla Coil does not actually get locked down or get killed off in time for the sentry gun to finish. That was weird, but I was trying to say that from the Allied perspective of he didn't kill off the Tesla Coil fast enough to switch the Hydrofoil's weapon jamming ability to, back up, Cryocopter, to actually lock down the sentry gun is what I was trying to say there. But he did force off the Soviet MCV. Forcing Soviet onto 3 refineries is very important versus a 4 refinery Allied player, which is where your income is just rolling so well. At this point, transitioning into ground-based mech, some sort of Allied armor facility play, is certainly a viable option. And oh, L3o3d, it's the little things in life. You know, it's the details that kind of separate a lot of these players. He needs to actually back off and leave this building here he needs just a little bit of HP left on that building. But this is a nice amount of Cryocopters from 1stNoob. If he ends up losing these, though, you have to think of the investment. 6,400 credits, and V4 rockets going to be actually decimating some of these infantry. And kind of the most important, not the most important, I won't say that, but kind of one of the most annoying things about the V4 rocket is their split heads, and when they just knock over just a massive amount of infantry. Hammer Tank does get eliminated, but oh, these Cryocopters, no, they're not overextended by any means, because the Bullfrogs are in such low numbers. It may be time to add on like 2 MiGs or something like that. You don't have to go crazy with the MiGs, Oh, 1stNoob, no, don't run back into the toxins. He did keep his javelin troopers alive, which is very important. And you want to talk about zoning out armies, this is a great way to do it. A lot of players complain about how, of course, allied players... Oh, wow, he just needs to pause that production. How a lot of allied players are able to use Cryo-Geddon, Cryo-Blast, Cryo-Shot to be able to just zone out armies, force engagements in awkward situations, but... Desolator Airstrike does the exact same thing. Maybe it's not quite as strong. In fact, I would say it's nowhere near as strong as Cryo-Geddon, just because the damage over time is so much more different than the hardcore freeze that is provided by Cryo-Geddon. Oh, these cryocopters, they gotta be careful. Now, pulling over just the weakened ones, like, for example, you can keep 4 of those cryocopters on the front lines to sort of guarantee that safety, because a lot of players just won't engage into cryocopters until they feel there's no other option. So you can pull, you know, just 4 of them and leave the 2 of them over there to heal. Not too difficult to do, but again, 4 refinery allies is going to be such a comfortable position. He can do all sorts of different things on this, although... Unfortunately, he can't go aircraft carriers, which I feel like is really the next step for our allied players, going tier 3 and getting aircraft carriers, even just 1. Don't go crazy with the aircraft carriers, but use the blackout missile to go ahead and lock down this army, because crashing a single blackout missile into an army, into a vehicle-based army like, hey, this one over here, which has basically no infantry in it, not even Tesla troopers, can be so powerful. Now, cryocopters brought out onto the front lines. They're trying to shrink down the V4s, but the reaction time is well enough for both players. They do pull back. And oh my gosh, Natasha is actually out on the field, going to be able to snipe down quite a few of these infantry, but she can get frozen down so quickly. Now, Cryoblast is a great way to zone out some of these bullfrogs, but it doesn't even matter because 2 cryocopters do get eliminated quite nicely. Natasha is technically still frozen. Can she actually get cleaned up? Yes, hands away, some nice veterancy status there, but does he have any way to stop the hammer tanks? The shrinks have to be on point. They are pretty much on point. Needs to focus down the hammer tanks, which are on the front lines. The V4s are also way too far forward, and these hammer tanks are getting frozen down. Oh, Leo may have overstepped his bounds. 1stNoob can clean up a lot of the army, get himself a lot of breathing room, and again, I would love to see even just a single aircraft carrier to help lock down this army of our Soviet player. But Twin Blades and MiGs, use them to your advantage. At the very least, force out Apollos to be running around the map. A Kula sub is a good start. Okay. You killed off, well, you forced the sell-off of that refinery. What about all of these juicy targets, which would be difficult for an allied player to defend without Apollos? They're either, I mean, they're really going to have to do one of 2 things, unless they build Apollos, which again then takes away from their Vindicator numbers, and unless they build another airfield or sacrifice their Vindicators, they've only got 1 Apollo, and not a huge deal to work with. All right, back to my point is multi-gunner turrets dropping down everywhere. They're going to have more than a couple multi-gunner turrets to defend all of those angles, or they're pulling their army out of position. Either one is kind of a good thing, but the harassment falling only to the allied player is going to put them in a very comfortable position because they can harass so efficiently. Bullfrogs coming in, they're so wow, they're actually... He committed to that so hard with those 2 Vindicators. He does end up losing 1 Vindicator. He's not currently reproducing any Vindicators. Bringing in Terror Drones is such a good idea. Tesla Troopers as well, just to help deal with the growing amount of allied armor. He does have 5 Guardian tanks out on the field, and I dig the killing of these Riptide APCs, or ACVs rather. But the Bullfrogs are starting to get pulled in different directions. See, now there's no anti-air up here. Suddenly MiGs would help him deal with this problem, but he has not gone for that airfield. He is probably starved on resources, and actually he's going to be expanding onto the low ground, which is not a refinery you see taken very often, is the low ground one, but it's a one that's a little bit more defensible in this situation. Also, he's already tier 3, which means dreadnoughts are a great option for our Soviet player. Now, Athena cannons are out. Aegis Shield suddenly changes things quite a bit, because you get 3 or 4 Aegis Shields on top of an army, and V4s just don't have quite the same impact that they did unless they're using their regular warhead. If they're using the split multi-warhead mode, they just don't do very much. They all do a little chunk of damage to that Aegis Shield, but they're not really doing the damage that you would like them to do. And I think Dreadnoughts are a good way to go for our Soviet player. Riptide, It's a nice thought, but it's one of those thoughts that needs cryocopters to help it out. He can't just send a single Riptide against all of these walled buildings and expect to actually do any damage. He's just going to get cleaned up before anything really happens. V4s need to get pulled back. You got to stay on top of your army. Leo needs to make sure that he's watching that, but at the same time, I'm sure he's looking somewhere else. Another Kula sub. He didn't actually need 2 of them. I'm not sure why he produced the second one. Could have been using that money for something else, but he's reestablished himself on those 4 refineries, which is good for a Soviet player. I mean, Kula subs are good, but they're also quite expensive. And also, yeah, again, the details of just, you know, you don't have to pull your tanks back to your Crusher Crane. But again, you know what doesn't get shrunk down by cryocopters is MiGs. MiGs and MiGs Bullfrog combination. Actually, 1stNoob donates 2, even almost 3 of those cryocopters away to the Soviet charity. And hey, if you're gonna go for Natasha, she actually unfreezes at just the right time. Oh, Iron Curtain fires off as well, and suddenly there's 6 hammer tanks on the front lines, maybe even 7, that are completely invincible. Mirage tanks are great, but they're not enough to stop this kind of an army coming out for Leo in one fell swoop. He may have just won himself the game, because this allied army has got nothing on the red Soviet might. He cleans up one of the hammer tanks, but now, okay, it's worn off a little bit here, but does he actually have enough to push back against this army? I think he may just need to commit. The Bullfrogs may have been pushed back too far, though. And yeah, the Bullfrogs aren't actually in good enough numbers. Cryo Shot is firing off. Cryo Blast going to be locking down a couple of those tanks, more so than should actually be getting locked down. But again, the army mix just wasn't as good as it could have been in that final engagement there. And I mean, that Iron Curtain could have been used on like 1 or 2 Bullfrogs just to guarantee that those cryocopters aren't as powerful as they could be. Once you thin it down to like 1 cryocopter, suddenly 6 or 7 hammer tanks is just too many forces to deal with. At any rate, you can still see 1stNoob taking a huge loss there in units. I'm not actually sure what that was. It was one of the engagements, but that was just a huge drop-off in units. And then near the end here, another sort of drop-off as the Iron Curtain activates, and suddenly Leo is just able to power on through. A pretty good match coming out from these 2 players overall. Not a huge resource increase here for Leo, but again, he was ahead those 4 refineries for the majority of the game. Ended up getting slowed down there as he lost one of the refineries at the end, had the uptick because of that 4th refinery getting reestablished. Some definite mistakes from each player, but a solid match overall. And of course, thank you all very much for watching, and this is Sybert signing out.